very much, and thank you, the students, for really coming in such a big number and being interested in this topic. And it is about time. If you think that Holocaust happened 67 years ago, there are not too many people around. So in 2-3 years, we will not have any speaker anymore, unless I live over 100. I don't think so. Anyhow, it is a lot about Holocaust. You are not going to learn the Holocaust. It's impossible, right? You can read for years and not know enough. But you're going to learn about my family and the Holocaust, what happened to me, to my family, where were we, what we have learned, and how we got out of it, okay? You heard that I was born in Romania. It happens that you read Night, right? And Elie Wiesel is from the same hometown, or I'm sorry, I am from the same hometown as Elie Wiesel, Sziget. Sziget is here a map of, here you have a map of Europe, and I want to show you, this is Romania, I am Romanian born, and this is my hometown, Sziget, in the northern part of Romania. Actually, had Elie Wiesel put our town on the map. Everybody knows he's from there. You read his book? Not really. Yeah. Anyway, this town of Sziget had about 30,000 people, almost equally divided between Romanians, Hungarians, and Jews. Actually, there were 12,000 Jews in this little town. And I have to tell you, it was a very cohesive group of people, very select and very separated from the rest. We were all very, very religious. We all spoke our Yiddish language. We all cared for the holidays, right? And we, you know, everything that the religion is asking, we are very religious. And maybe this is what helped the Jews to live so many years, right? Yeah, outside Israel. My family consisted of my parents and my 7 brothers. I had many, many relatives in the surrounding villages. In some villages, I had grandparents, I had cousins, I had aunts, uncles, and indeed, every summer I visited them, and this was my summer vacations, to go to visit them. I went to school. I want to tell you how the school was at that time. Sure, you started in elementary school. In our time, it was a compulsory 8 years. But after 4 years, if you wanted to go to high school, one took an entrance examination to the high school and went to the 8 years of high school. So I was a good student. I loved school. Even in the elementary school, parents sometimes asked me to help their daughters, right, with mathematics and science. And I really wanted to study and, you know, become somebody. So after the 4 years, I took the exam and I was now a high school student. I have to talk to you about our high schools. At that time, not too many girls went to high school, and very few Jewish girls went to high school. You know, our girls knew that they have to have children, they have to stay home. If they want to work, they can be seamstresses, not other profession was available. But I wanted to do more. So, in the 8 years of high school, just to let you know what were the topics, we had 8 years of French, 6 years of Latin, 4 years of German, and 2 years of Greek. This about languages. We had sciences, we had mathematics, algebra, we had history of Romania, history of the world. And we even had gymnastics, music, we call them dexterities. So school was indeed very demanding, and many, many students couldn't keep up. But you know, it gave you a certification, almost like having a college degree here. And this is why they had to pass the year, and many students couldn't, so the parents asked me to tutor some of them. And from the age of 13, when I was in the 3rd year of high school, I always tutored 1 or 2 or 3 girls from my class. And sure, I spent half of the afternoon with one girl and her home, the other half with the other one to do the homework. And you know, I had my extra money. I don't say that we were poor, but you know, with 8 children, it was always good to have your own money, like you when you want to babysit, right? So the school was quite difficult. We worked very, very hard. This was a time in the 1930s, right? When in the war lots of things happened. And we were very isolated in Romania. That part of Romania was also called Transylvania, and it had been part of the Hungarian, Austro-Hungarian Empire before. So, meanwhile, by the time we got to the last years, we belonged to many, many organizations. They were Zionist organizations, students who wanted to go to Palestine at that time. They were communist organizations that were clandestine, and everybody belonged somewhere. I even had a boyfriend in my senior year of high school. And you know, my boyfriend, unfortunately, was part of the communist cell, which was not allowed. Anyhow, we tried to work in our organizations. We tried to have fun, to dance, to go to movies. So it was a pretty good life, considering. But now the war has started. And let me tell you how it started. In 1940, I graduated high school. The war has started in 1939. I'm sure you have learned history, so I will give you just very little about, you know, the historical background. You know, Hitler came to power in 1933. And you know, Hitler conquered, right, his people with 2 great ideas. One idea was that the Germans are special people. They are special, they are from a superior race, and they should have much more countries, because there are Germans in many other countries, and everything should belong to the great Germany. So the greatness of German people was one point of his, more so of the Aryan race. His other great idea, which he conquered his people, were about the Jews. He blamed Jews for everything that happened to Germany in the Second World War. You know, the Germans had lost the war. Hitler tells them, you lost the war because of the Jews, because the Jews took over, because the Jews had their hands in the economy. When I come to the power, I'm going to chase them out from Europe. This was his idea. I want you to realize that before coming to power, he didn't say, I'm going to kill them all. He said, I'm going to chase them away. And you will see how over the years, his idea of what to do, you know, with the Jews, from chasing them away, from emigrating, he went to completely wanted to annihilate them. So anyway, the war started in 1939 when they attacked Poland. The Nazis and the Germans were very well prepared, and in 10 days they occupied the whole Poland. The Poles hardly had time to fight against them. And after they occupied, right, they were, I had to say something before, right, that he came to power in 1933 and already started the rules and regulations against the Jewish people. He didn't allow any more Jewish businesses. He wanted them to emigrate if they had where to, but soon no country would accept immigrants from Germany. I have to tell you about a very interesting book, a very interesting movie called Out of Africa. And it shows how a Jewish couple who wanted to leave Germany in those times, late 30s, couldn't get to any European, any American country, only to Kenya and Africa. And they made a very interesting movie of that. So you went wherever you could just to get a place out of Germany. So the war started. By then, there were a lot of restrictions of the Jews in Germany. They lost their jobs. They could emigrate if they paid a high tax, but not many people had this money to pay. They lost their jobs. Kids couldn't go to the public schools. A lot of hardship. But in 1939, when he occupied Poland, he let them go free to do whatever they want against the Jews. And indeed, no sooner did they arrive to Poland and they started to separate the Jews from the rest of the population. It took sometimes a few months, or they started to kill them. I have to tell you one of the most terrible books called Babi Yar. Babi Yar was a mass grave in which 1 year after the Nazis arrived to Poland and Ukraine, they killed 100,000 of Jews. And that was a period when killing was done by bullets. In a book appeared not long ago, say, Holocaust by bullets. So in the early years, they didn't have camps yet. They simply, gathered them from the city or from the villages, they took them to the nearby forest, they asked them to dig a big, grave, and they machine gunned them. Hundreds of thousands, almost 1 million Jews were killed much before anybody knew of a camp like Auschwitz. And this was in 1939, in 1940, 1941. After successful occupation of Poland, the Nazis continued, right, to occupy many countries. In 1940, they occupied France. In 1941, they started a war against Soviet Union. In 1942, they occupied Netherlands, and Denmark, and Norway. So they spread all over Europe. But in 1940, the Nazis needed helpers. So they came to the Hungarians. You see this map? Here is Romania, here is Hungary, here is Germany. The Nazis came to the Hungarians and asked them to join him in the conquest of Europe. And the Hungarians agreed, but they got something for it. The Hungarians got part of Romania, part of Czechoslovakia, and of Yugoslavia. So, in order to be allies, they enlarged their country with part of Romania, which was Transylvania. So our part was given to the Hungarians. And one day, in 1940, the Hungarians marched in without war, without fighting. They just marched in the whole Transylvania, and suddenly we became Hungarians. But this was a very difficult period because the Hungarians were already fascists, right? They were not up to kill us, but they started a severe recrimination and persecution of the Jews. The moment they arrived, they started to take over, right, businesses. They did raids in the houses and took whatever they wanted. They didn't allow Jewish children in public high schools. A lot of hardship started when they arrived in 1940. So became Hungarians. At that time, I want you to remember, and it's important, that out of my 5 brothers, only 2 brothers were home with us, and the 5 brothers were away. They went to study, they went, away. They were not in Sziget. The 2 brothers were with us, with me and my parents. Was my older brother Moishe, who was 29 years old. He was a very talented artist, draftsman. And now that everything changed, jobs were lost, you had to know Hungarian, not Romanian, he was very lucky to get a job at the movie house. Now, a movie house job is very good, not to mention all the movies you can see, right? So in 1940, my brother got a job to do the drawings, right, and the advertisements for the one movie house. And I always helped him in his job. And it was a great job. I remember how we went with Mother to see the movie. In 1940, we even had American movies. It was Gone with the Wind, it was Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, it was Pinocchio, the famous. I just remember how my brother made a huge panel. He made the letters, I filled the letters, right? I colored them, I helped them. So we came with my mother, we saw the movie. After the movie, Mother went home, I went behind the screen, and I helped my brother working. So he and me, we worked very hard in the movie house. But then something came to me too, as a job. As the Hungarian decreed that the Jewish children cannot attend public high schools, suddenly there was a big problem. We didn't have private schools in our town. So what should the parents do? So the parents came up with the idea. Those who had money sent the children to large towns that had private schools or Hebrew schools, but most of them did not have money. So they decided the following: to register their children into those schools, stay home and study with tutor, and at the end of the semester go and take the exam. And it worked. And my other brother who was home, the 14-year-old Janko, was in the same situation. He couldn't go to public high school, so he registered to a private school in a large town and needed to be tutored. I became a tutor. I became the main tutor almost in the city because I spoke well Hungarian. I had just graduated high school and I knew all the subjects. And I had sometimes 10 kids a day in my home to teach them. And you know, they came in groups, 3 at 8 o'clock in the morning, 4 at 9 o'clock, at 10 o'clock. And indeed, there were days I had 10 to 15 students at home. And we worked very hard. There was no school material. They didn't have, they had only one book, right? The school book and nothing else. We had no blackboard, we had no maps, we had no books. And those kids studied so hard, indeed, that whenever they went to take the exam at the end of the year, they passed the exam. So here we worked very hard. My brother in the movie house and me with students and helping my brother in the movie house. This was in 1940. Meanwhile, war went on, right? In 1941 and 42, as the Nazis spread out and started to occupy other countries, there was a hardship in Hungary, but the Hungarian Jews remained in place because the Hungarians didn't want them to be sent away. They wanted to use them. So, as I told you before, whenever they occupied the country, they started to kill. And I told you about the book, How Holocaust was by bullets. By 1941, they have killed already 500,000 people. By 42, they have killed probably 1 million people just by bullets. And that is when the Nazis had second thoughts about the killing. They said, we don't like this type of killing, right, with machine gunning. No, we don't, because first of all, the soldiers, sure, are not happy to see children being killed. Then the people around can see what happens and what we do to them. And then they go home and they will tell for the German people what they did. So suddenly they had a second thought about how to kill the Jews. And this is where in 1942, in February, it was called the Wannsee Conference in 1942, February. And there the leadership of the Nazi Party decided what to do with the Jews. They called it final solution. They decided on a blueprint to do from now on to get rid of the Jews. It was called final solution. I'm sure that you've heard of it. Did you study the final solution? Well, I will just summarize it because I don't have more time for it. But I wanted to say, final solution had 3 elements. One element was, no, we are not going to kill them home. First, we are going to build ghettos in every city, and we are going to enclose the Jews in this ghetto. So they will leave their homes, they will leave their belongings, and we have them in one place. So they decided ghetto in every city. Number 2, we won't kill them in their towns. We are going to put them on a train and ship them to killing places. It's called deportation. Number 3, we are going to build camps where they will be killed. So there are 3 elements of the final solution, right? Just to repeat, it is about doing the ghetto, and this is where we know about the ghetto. Deportation, right? And they started to build camps. And I want you to know, there were 2 types of camps. There were death camps and there were working camps. Working camps were also called concentration camps. And the difference was great. For every little factory in Germany and the occupied countries, they built a small camp for 200-300 people for workers, slave workers. So they put there, Jewish prisoners, right? They were starved, they were beaten, they worked very hard, but they cannot be killed because they didn't make anything for their killing. But they died of disease, of being beaten. Hundreds of working camps were built in Germany and all the occupied countries. Hundreds. Almost every factory had a working camp. But death camps were only 6. And all the 6 death camps were built in Poland. You have here a picture of Poland. And you can see the most important was Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Majdanek, Belzec, 6 death camps. And these death camps were the most specialized factories to kill people. By then, they were working on gas, which can kill people. And finally, they discovered a new gas which can kill in a few minutes. I remember when I went to Poland with a group of students to see these camps, in Majdanek, there was written there on the wall, in this camp, we experimented which is the best gas which kills the fastest. When we use carbon monoxide, the people died in about 40 minutes. When we use Zyklon, they died in 5 minutes. So from here on, they use only Zyklon. And for this, they built one huge room called the gas chamber. They taught people to undress. Don't forget where you put them. Here their numbers, because you will come back. So put your clothes on and remember the number. Completely undressed, women, children, and men. And then they pushed them. They said, you're going to have a shower. They locked the door. And the SS officers went up on top where there was a place where they poured the canisters of gas. And in 5 to 10 minutes, everybody was dead. Then came the helpers, who were all Jewish men, unfortunately. The helpers in this endeavor, they opened the doors, right? And they took the corpses, right, on push carts, and they moved them to the next building, which was a chimney, crematorium. And the crematorium had ovens, and on each oven they put 3, 4, 5 corpses, and they burned them. And sure, those chimneys, right, all day long while you look at them, right, you just could see flames and soot and smoke. Auschwitz had 4 crematoriums. So this is how, in 1-2 hours, hundreds of people could be killed, and nobody was alive who would enter the death camps, to enter the crematorium. So after they built this, and I told you Auschwitz was the biggest of them, they had a blueprint, and from that point on in 1942, this is what they followed. Every city had their own, ghetto. All the people from the ghetto were put on trains to go to one of these camps. So this was the final solution. Now, I'm coming back to us, the Hungarians, okay? In 1944, after so many countries were already occupied, the Jews of Hungary had it a little free, right? Because we were not taking it to camps. We just had the hardship of the war, and the hardship was bigger and bigger as they started to recruit the young men and send them to the front. And my brother, the draftsman, was drafted and he was sent to the front. Jewish people were sent to the front, but not the soldiers. They got no uniforms, they got no armaments, they just were sent ahead of the Nazi officers, right, to sweep the floor, to sweep the mines, right, and the ditches, and my brother had to go. And this was a great problem for us, our family, because it was a very good income. So it happened that my brother went to the manager of the movie house and told him, well, I have to go. I was drafted, but I know you need another draft, so why don't you take my little sister? She's as good as I am. Well, I was not by half as good, but he took me. So I got the movie job. And from that moment on, I was the only breadwinner in the family, and I was hardly 21 years old. Having a movie job, working all day long, having students, in the evening going to do the movie work, very hard. But then there were other troubles during the Hungarian occupation. 2-3 years into occupation, they started to arrest the young people whom they considered in the communist cells. And you remember I told you my boyfriend joined that organization. And my boyfriend and many, many other young people were arrested. They were arrested, they were put right in jail, they were beaten, they were tortured to give names of other friends. They wanted to know where the material, the books were hidden. I remember how I had in the woodshed my communist book, which I read getting it from my boyfriend. Anyway, it was a lot of hardship, and then there was a trial, and my boyfriend got 5 years in jail. So here we are not under German occupation yet, right? But my boyfriend in jail, my brother, on the front, me working for the whole family, hardship. So then, in 1944, by the time it was already sure that the Nazis are losing the war. Stalingrad had happened, and they started to push back. That is when, as the Hungarians were questioning, should we open the doors for the Nazis to take our Jews, or should we take our Jews? Finally, they relented, and the Germans occupied Hungary. And as they occupied Hungary, they had a free hand to do whatever they wanted. Indeed, they came in March 1944, and in no time, in 2-3 weeks, all the Jews from my hometown, Szeged, were in the ghetto. 2-3 more weeks, everybody was on a train toward Auschwitz. And 2 more weeks, 80% of them were killed in those gas chambers. Now, let me tell you, me and my family, what happened when the Nazis arrived. The Nazis arrived, as I told you, 1944. First, they were raids in the houses, obviously. They also confiscated in every house a room for the officers. The raids, they took whatever they wanted. They could take money and jewelry and belongings where they wanted. And meanwhile, they built the ghetto. You read Elie Wiesel's book, right? And you know what the ghetto was. What was the ghetto in Szeged? They separated about 10 small streets at the end of the town with little private homes. They asked the Romanians and Hungarians to remove them to the center. They emptied it completely. They surrounded it by barbed wire. They did a gate. They had a list of all the Jews and see it from every street. Somebody asked me yesterday, how do they know who's a Jewish guy? How did they look? They had a list given by the Hungarians of every street who is Jewish in every street. So, the ghetto was ready in 1 week, and they started now to send the people to the ghetto. So they came to our house and they said, tomorrow morning you move to the ghetto. All you can take with you is 1 suitcase of clothing per person. You can take food for 2-3 weeks. You can take mattresses, and everything else you leave home. Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, be in the center square. Now imagine, right, that we had to leave our home, right? And we had to make a little package of a few things that were allowed. And then from every street you could see people pushing their push carts, right, and gathering in the center and going toward the ghetto. I told you the ghetto was at the edge of the town. So one guy, first we had to go through the gate where they identified us. Then one guard took us in a small street stopped in front of a very small house, opened a door and says, you put your belongings, this is your room. There was already a family in that room. A few hours later, more people came, another family to that room. A few hours later, more people came. In 2 days, that little house, which consisted of 2 rooms, a porch, a kitchen, and an outhouse. All this, in that 10 families were moved in 1 week. I don't have to tell you, right? There were no beds, we had some mattresses, there were no more mattresses. We young people, because by then only one brother remained home. We slept on the porch, right? It was summer. So this ghetto had no stores, had no market. We didn't have where to buy anything, all what we brought, with us. And we lived so tightly that there was no room and time to go and cook a little bit. I remember how mother had to fight her way to get a half an hour in the kitchen to boil some potatoes or beans. And then there was, I don't know where the children got their milk. And this ghetto, this way, lasted for 3 weeks. And these 3 weeks, you read it in Elie Wiesel's book, right? The ghetto was jammed with people, right? There was no more food. People started to be very, very hungry. And that is when the second phase started, deportation. In 3 weeks in the ghetto, and it's very interesting to tell you, I had a short time in ghetto. When you talk about the German ghetto, the Nazi ghettos, talk about the Warsaw ghetto, which lasted for years. 100,000 people were there. They starved to death. But we had a short 3 weeks of ghetto. And then one day, again, the guards, they came to say, tomorrow morning we are going to the railroad station because we go by train, we travel.